sure his legacy is sealed. So his two friends, Henry Condell and James Hemming, these were both fellow actors at the Globe Theater, part of the Kingsmen. They had been around for a long time. They originated roles in Shakespeare's plays. They became shareholders after a while. And they're mentioned, as you will see very soon, actually in Shakespeare's will. So they also, they go around and collect all of the plays that are going to be published here. And with this, they go around to anyone who has published a Shakespeare play already, because those people now have the rights to publish Shakespeare's plays. So they become like co-publishers and share in the profit of this complete works. And that's a lot of trouble. They also have to find the best possible copy at a time when people, like most actors, just got their sides. They got their cue words right before they spoke, and then they got their parts. So you would have maybe one prompt copy of the entire play at the theater. And of course, Shakespeare's Globe burned down in 1613. So some of those might have been lost. So you have to look around and find the best possible copies. And that's what they did. And it took them a while. And they wrote a lovely preface to the complete works in this first folio. And you see here, they sign it here. But again, I wanted to establish just how close they are to Shakespeare. Now, we do not have many pieces of paper from Shakespeare's life. This is one of them. This is the middle page of his will. And so clearly you can see here that it's talking about his bequest for them, right? Anyone else think it looks absolutely like scribbles? There's a close-up where it's much easier to read, right? No, I think stationary hand is tough to make out at the best of times. And then when you realize that it's actually this part right here, that small, that is about them, it's interesting. But just wanted to say, this whole section that I've circled and that I have here is about the rings. He's leaving money for people that he really liked to buy rings to remember him. Very few non-family members are mentioned in here. It's and so they mentioned three names: John Hemming, Richard Burbage, and Henry Condell. Richard Burbage, of course, is famous as being the original Hamlet. He was the first actor to play most of the big roles in Shakespeare. And presumably he would have been one of the people trying to find these plays for the first folio, except for one small thing. He died in 1619 before the project was completed. By the way, he has the best gravestone ever for an actor because he was such a big deal, so well known. First Hamlet, first Othello, you name a big part in Shakespeare, he was the first one to play it. His tombstone just read, "Exit Burbage." That's kind of a mic drop. You don't even need to put his full name. Everyone knows who you mean. So again, you see those names here, and this is one of the few times that we actually have anything that we know for sure is in Shakespeare's handwriting, his signature at the bottom of the page there. So next we have this catalog of all of the plays the first folio.
I'm so sorry.
And one of the amazing things about this, so we've got 36 plays in here, 18 of them had never been published before. Without this book, we would lose 18 of Shakespeare's plays. And so I have my second question is, which of those might be first published in the first folio? So without this book, we would not have a copy of one of these. Is it Romeo and Juliet? Is it Hamlet? Is it Macbeth? Or is it Pericles? So
I apologize. I've been trying to get our setup taken care of over there on YouTube and get them
Oh
all
no.
squared away, and so I had to step away for a minute. I apologize. Um, so let me fix
Okay,
my
while you're doing that, I'll
slow
read these
roll. I'm
back
so
to you.
sorry.
That's okay. So is it Romeo and Juliet that's first published here? Is it Hamlet? Is it Macbeth? Or is it Pericles that we wouldn't have without this? Oh, and I should also tell you, if anybody's speed reading that list, I can tell you that there is one play title that didn't make it into the catalog. It took so long negotiating rights for the plays. There was one that they didn't know whether or not they were going to get the rights when they made the catalog list. So there is one that's not on there that is in the book.
So I know that there's 4 versions of Hamlet, and that they're all very different. Um, and I yeah, I guess that's all I know about those shows. I know there's 4 versions of Hamlet. So I'm gonna guess one of our participants said Pericles. So I'm going to guess I guess I'm gonna go with Pericles. Our audience has been right so far. And I feel like Macbeth had to have been there, in my opinion, but maybe I'm wrong. All right, so what is it?
Okay, so with this, I'm actually going to reveal a few of the big names out of the 18 that were never printed before this. We would not have any copy if it weren't for this. All of the other versions that we have since then are based on the folio. Let's see, it's not letting me just tap a button. Hold on. There we go. These are the big names that we would not have without it. As You Like It, we wouldn't have All the World's a Stage, The Men, Women, Merely Players. We wouldn't have Julius Caesar, Friends, Romans, Countrymen, Lend Me Your Ears. And next, we would not have Macbeth.
Out, damn spot, out.
No Double Double, Toil and Trouble, Fire Burn and Cauldron Bubble. No Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. It just breaks my heart. Some people think that maybe it wasn't, it hadn't been published yet because it was John Fletcher co-wrote it. No, he co-wrote The Life of Henry VIII, or All Is True, that's right here. So who knows? We also wouldn't have The Taming of the Shrew, which we're
If
doing
my
this summer.
sting, if my sting, if my my the
If
wash to
I am,
sting. Sorry.
yeah, if I'm one
Yes,
fish, best beware my sting.
my sting. Thank you.
Absolutely love it. The Tempest, we would not have one of the best plays of all
Which means we
time.
also wouldn't have the version of the Tempest that that isn't actually that ends happily. Oh, Brave New World. We wouldn't have that.
Yes, yes. And Twelfth Night. And so again, a world without all of these plays or these plays. So if you saw Measure for Measure last fall and loved it, we wouldn't have that.
Oh
If you
man.
saw our Cymbeline a few years ago, we wouldn't have that. So many amazing plays, including
Speaking
some,
of,
yeah,
King John is in the first folio, and if you come out and see the complete works of William Shakespeare abridged, one of the things that might be pretty important would be if you know anything about King John. So
nice.
there's a little spoiler for a
Yeah,
little tempting thing for you. And Timon of Athens, actually. There is
nice.
a joke in the very first time I directed the show. There's a joke in there about Timon of Athens that I had to Google. I did not understand it,
Nice.
and now I do. So you can come, and if you can catch me after the show, you can tell me if you think you caught it. I'd be super proud.
Nice. And also, Timon of Athens has one of my favorite character names. It's Apomantis, but it looks like ape mantis. And so my brain just starts creating that creature. So again, we would not have any of these plays if it weren't for this single book. All of our versions of this, all of the different editions that have come out are based on this one copy alone. So Hamlet, like you said, has been there in some different versions. There are 3 versions total, 2 quartos, one known as the bad quarto, which is actually a really fun version. The second quarto is actually longer than the version in the folio. And so people have to decide which one they're following. And each one, the second quarto and the folio, has to be or not to be in a different place. So if you're putting on a production, you get to decide where you want to put it in the play. And King Lear has a similar issue where they are actually changed a bit, and each one works as a slightly different play. One is much more insular, just looking at the main characters. The other has some servants and outside people commenting on the action. So it can be really interesting looking at these side by side. So you then have some plays that are missing, and yes, the first one is Pericles, Prince of Tyre. So first of all, I told you one was off of the content list. It was actually Troilus and Cressida that isn't there, and they stuck it in. I can't remember whether it's the end of comedies, beginning of histories, or if it's the end of histories, beginning of tragedies, but the very last play in the book is Cymbeline, which is under tragedies, even though most people end happily ever after. Who knew? But interestingly enough, Two Noble Kinsmen, again written by co-written with John Fletcher, isn't included there. Not quite sure why. Edward III wasn't really widely considered a Shakespeare until the 1980s. Cardenio is a lost play based on Don Quixote, showing that Shakespeare was still keeping up to date with modern books at the end of his career and cashing in on that. And Love's Labour's Won, which some people argue is actually Much Ado About Nothing. Other people think it's a separate play entirely, but we don't have it. So who knows? So those are the things that are not in the book. Everything else is there. So you get a really thick book. As you can see here, there are 908 pages in a complete folio. Obviously, this one is missing the title page and the preface, but it has most of the rest of it. And actually, most versions of the folio are missing at least a few pages, most commonly from the beginning or end. They may have damage like this one does. So when we talk about the first folio and how collectible it is, just know they're not all pristine, gorgeous copies. Some of them have really been used. And we'll talk about the history of some of those individual ones. So next we have our next quiz question. And this is possibly my favorite. So William and Isaac Jaggard are the 2 printers, but this question is really about the father, William. And that is, why was this printer of the first folio a surprising choice? A, he was blind. B, he had pirated Shakespeare's work. C, he is the only man that we know Shakespeare didn't like. Or D, all of the above. So yeah, this is one that always surprises me because yeah, for any of these reasons, he might have not been the most obvious choice. Again, A, he was blind. B, he had pirated Shakespeare's work. C, he is the only man that we know Shakespeare didn't like. Or D, all of the above. Any guesses? Any answers?
So if our inside folks want to hang out for just a second, I'm having some strange keyboard trouble. I'm so sorry. But I would think that all of the above sounds like a great answer. Mostly because I love the idea that the man that Shakespeare didn't like, that has like multiple, has, I don't know, that there's multiple reasons why, right? He doesn't like him because maybe he was rude, but he pirated his work, and then the guy is blind. So why are you printing the first folio? You can't read it, I guess, because it's not in Braille. That sounds terrible. But so I've got an all of the above, but I want to say that he pirated Shakespeare's work doesn't make any sense to me because Shakespeare distilled a lot of plays from other people. Yeah. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Our audience, we've got a voice, we've got a vote for all of the above. What else do we let's see if we've got any other responders here.
I think we've got 2 on Zoom for all of the
We
above.
do. We've got two that stated all of the above. So I guess we're gonna go with all of the above. What's the answer?
You are correct. It is all of the above. So first of all, we have William Jaggard. And see, my clicker isn't always working either. We have William Jaggard here, who had not been blind for most of his career, but was at this stage. Thankfully, his son Isaac was there to help with the day-to-day printing. And then he absolutely, here we go, pirated Shakespeare's work, because remember, Shakespeare didn't care about printing his plays, but William Jaggard printed his poems without his permission. And it was in this 1599 quarto, The Passionate Pilgrim, by W. Shakespeare, putting Shakespeare's name on the title page. He stole a couple of poems out of the lines of Love's Labour's Lost, which is mostly poetic, mostly rhymed and all of that. He also had some other of Shakespeare's poems, as well as poems by other people. And yeah, he published this without Shakespeare's permission, without even meeting him. And so we have a letter from one of Shakespeare's fellow playwrights that says, and I quote, "The author, I know, is much offended with Mr. Jaggard." So evidently you can rip off stories, but as soon as you print Shakespeare's poetry without his permission, it's over. But actually, this book was so popular that it actually got reprinted in 1612 toward the end of Shakespeare's career. And I love this, certain amorous sonnets between Venus and Adonis. Venus and Adonis is one of the poems that Shakespeare had printed, took time and effort to do that. And by the way, not a single poem in this quarto is actually a sonnet. None of them are 14 lines. So I just love the randomness of this. So he pirated Shakespeare's work. We know Shakespeare didn't like him because of that. And not only did he pirate him while Shakespeare was alive, he pirated him when Shakespeare was dead. So we get these papier quartos. They're also known as the false folio. This is the first attempt in 1619 to gather Shakespeare's plays into a single book, because all of the quartos before have been in separate books. So here's another problem. Jaggard didn't have the rights to most of these. Most of these belonged to whoever had printed them first. And so he made fake title pages showing that they had been published before the people who really published them. And grouped in this, we have several plays that you probably wouldn't recognize from a list of Shakespeare's plays. Sir John Oldcastle and A Yorkshire Tragedy. So lots and lots of problems here. So even as recently as 3 years after Shakespeare's death, when Hemming and Condell and maybe Burbage are thinking about creating a folio, here is William Jaggard ripping off their friend, trying to do the same thing with lousy copies, no less. So maybe they thought—
I can't believe there isn't a villain in any of Shakespeare's shows that are just this guy. I can't believe he didn't just go, you know what, you want to be like that? Let me make fun of you on stage.
Oh, so craziness. But he was the printer to the City of London. So he had some friends in high places. Maybe Shakespeare didn't want to get on anybody else's bad side. I don't know. He also was one of the few printers who had multiple printing presses, who had the capacity to do such a large book, such a large project. So I don't know. But by the end, his son Isaac really took over the day-to-day operations. And actually, William died a few months before the book was published. So you get a title page that has Isaac's name and not William's because of that reason. You also have Edward Blunt here, who didn't do any of the actual printing, but hey, he gave money, he gave advance money to make all of this happen. And as you're going to see, it took, in fact, let me go ahead and click that now. It took a long time to print 908 pages and approximately 750 copies of 908 pages. So they started printing in February 1622. They would pause if they got another good job, but they didn't get finished until November of the next year. This was a mammoth marathon task. So it is interesting, and maybe nobody else would take it on. Maybe it was so big and such a risk because you're losing other business in the meantime. I don't know. But it is interesting to look at with this. So now I want to think about actually printing this book or printing any book in the early 1600s. So you see here the picture of, in the background, you have men getting everything ready to be printed. They're selecting all of the individual letters to go in a block that they would then move over here, and the person would ink. He's rubbing all of the ink over it. You affix a paper over here, and then you slide that over and print it. You have a pile of blank paper and you have a pile of printed paper. So this is a complicated business. It is a time-consuming business. And because paper is so expensive, if you make a mistake, you don't throw it out. You notice what the problem is, you fix it as you go. And so you have plenty of copies that have mistakes in them. Here is a close-up where you have all of these individual letters put in, and then using an ink roller over this. And then you have to be careful about the consistency of the ink. It can't be too watery, it can't be too thick, it has to be just right, going full Goldilocks on this. And keep in mind, you have to set up everything on these pages. And when you see how small the type is, how many words that is, and you are under pressure to go a little bit faster to get your quota done for the day, the boss is probably hovering. That's a lot to deal with. And I'm amazed that they were as good as they were. You'll also note, I think this is going to be in the next slide. No, a little bit later. But you have to do everything like mirror everything backwards and right to left instead of left to right. But you're also working from original copies. You are not working from printed material. And so first, here is a beautiful copy of handwriting from the Elizabethan time period. I think I can read every word on here with no problem. It's beautiful. It's simple. By the way, here is the same person, still fairly easy to read later in their life. It's a little bit more complicated, but not too bad. This is pretty clear. By the way, can anyone see who wrote these? I do kind of love that.
I can see.
Yeah, my favorite handwriting of the Elizabethan era is the young Queen Elizabeth and Princess Elizabeth at the beginning of her career. It's amazing. And then she gets lazy.
Well, she gets closer to the end. She's like, I don't want to do this anymore.
Yes.
You either know what I said or you don't. Go away.
So with this, even toward the end, she still has handwriting. Like I can easily read from attempting right there. It's there. But you're probably going to have harder handwriting than that. And this is actually a perfect example of the kind of handwriting you would have. Here is a close-up. Out of curiosity, does anyone know where this is from? Who wrote this? Good piece of trivia.
I haven't the slightest. Okay, so it says British Museum,
Yep.
and it does look like along the side it has one says all, I think.
Yeah. So speech prompts.
Yeah.
It is from a play called Sir Thomas More. Does that ring any bells?
Yes, it does. Unfortunately, my college professor will be very upset with me because I will tell you that while I know that that's the answer to the Jeopardy question, I don't know what the Jeopardy question is.
Yeah. So the answer is we have 2 pages from the tragedy of Sir Thomas More that are presumably by William Shakespeare. So this is most likely Shakespeare's handwriting. It was a play that was written in collaboration with about 5 different playwrights. And this particular speech feels like Shakespeare. You can Google Ian McKellen, Sir Thomas More. You can listen to him speak it. It's his party trick. He loves doing this. But it also matches his handwriting with those signatures. So yeah. It's not 100%, but it's probably Shakespeare. So any of the plays that we only would have with the authorial manuscript, to get all technical, but the manuscript by the author, including where he crosses things out, would look like this. How much fun would that be to figure out what they're saying and then quickly fill up a page for printing?
No, thank you.
Yeah, me either. I took a class in paleography and it was the single hardest class of my graduate school because it's still, I can do part of this and then I get stuck. I also want to say that we only have Sir Thomas More because it was so scandalous that it was censored. They did not get permission to perform it. In fact, they put it on a shelf and people forgot about it. And hundreds of years later, they found it on a shelf in a room that wasn't being used. And so that is the only reason that we still have this play that may be the only writing of a play in Shakespeare's handwriting to survive. I think that is absolutely crazy. So our poor printers are looking at this with all the things that are scratched out, things written above that, trying to get everything right. So they're not going to be able to read every single word every single time. And they're putting in letter by letter, again, mirror image of it so that it will print the right way. And so, I mean, that's tough. I'm very impressed with how they do this. So with it, you end up with all of these things to print at once. So my question to you is, this is number 4. The first folio was printed A, 1 page at a time, B, 2 pages at a time, C, 4 pages at a time, or D, a choir at a time. And that's Q-U-I-R-E. It's not a singing choir. And you have to, if you're going with that, just go with it. I will tell you later on what a choir is. I know.
Well, so we know that it's because we know that the folio was like one single page. So that picture at the bottom of the screen where it shows like 4 sections, that would have been a quarto, right?
No.
Like, oh, because that would be where they cut it. No, okay, then I don't know. I mean, I would guess 1 page at a time, but so I got some split here. We've got some 1 page at a time. A choir at a time. Or we have some 2 pages at a time and a choir at a time. We've got 2 pages at a time over here on Facebook. So I think it looks like maybe 2 pages at a time, like front and back.
Okay, so this is where I get to be Oprah, because depending on how you interpret it, you get it right, you get it right, you get it right, you get it right. Okay,
That's what I was
so
thinking.
I like it where I'm evil in a good way rather than in a bad way. So to be clear, this one is one side of the page, so this would be an octavo rather than a quarto. Otherwise, you were absolutely on the right track there.
Oh, okay,
Um,
great.
so yeah, you have 8 pages on one side, and then you flip it over and you would have a total of 16. But we're in folio land. And the reason why I included this is because, as you've seen in the earlier pictures, the folio is 2 columns. So if you want to pretend that this is one page with column and column, and this is the second page with column, those 2 pages are printed on a single page of huge paper at once. So both of those answers are right. But then after you print all 750 pages of that, you turn it over and print the 2 that go on the back. So if you want to say that it's 4 pages at once or 2 pages, depending on how you're looking at, that would be right as well. So then we get to the next part. Ooh, and actually here you can see those 2 columns on each side. And again, think about all of those words that you have to get right, all of those letters coming from manuscript. It is kind of crazy. And the other thing I want to point out with this is you're having to figure out how much space to give. So when you have like enter, do you allow for this much or do you have more? Because it's also printed in quires, and a quire would be either 3 or 4 big old sheets, and thus either 12 or 16 folio pages. And the example I've got here goes with 16. And so with this, you're going to end up sewing these 4 pieces together in the center, and then you'll do that again and again so that you have this whole large group, and then you sew them into the binding. So if you've ever seen this at the top or bottom of a hardback book, it's where they're sewn in. If you've ever wondered what those bumps are on old books, it's where they've sewn additionally. But here is where quires get crazy complicated, because if you're printing 2 pages at a time, these middle 2 at the center of the quire are going to be this page and then this page, but the very bottom one is going to be on the outside page 1. So this is page 2, and then this is page 15, and on the outside is page 16. So it can be really tricky getting the numbering right. And also you have to figure out the numbering for whether it's 12 pages or 16 pages. For all of that, you have to figure out how much material you can cover there. So sometimes you end up with too much space. Sometimes you end up with not enough space, and you have to figure out what to do. Are you just going to leave some blank space? Are you going to maybe break up some lines to use the space and make it look prettier? Are you going to try to squeeze extra things in lines? Or maybe you're way too short and you're just going to lose some lines completely. I've definitely seen that happen. So you get really tough math and estimation when it comes to printing with these quires. And by the way, sometimes you end up with so much blank space that you decide to include the name of all the characters. And sometimes, even though this says actors, it's just the characters, but sometimes they include the name of the actors too, just to use up space with this.
So can I ask a question that might not? So I know that when I was creating the poster for Richard II, our production that we did in the fall with Maybury Hazenhouse, Knoxville Shakespeare on the Hill, one of the things that I did to complete the poster was that I went through and looked at the varying illustrations across all of the years of printings to find icons that other directors, artists, publishers, people involved thought were pertinent, right? What did they find to be the most interesting, the most interesting thing? And so to use those icons in our production and also in our media and in our stuff like that. So the photo that you just showed had that really, really intricate, detailed photo on the bottom. So was that kind of like, we have things, was that decided beforehand? Was that put on afterwards? Was that just like, oh, we have this big, huge spot, we should put art there?
I honestly don't know. I know the right books to look at. So, but what I would guess is they probably have some standard woodcuts for the things coming out of the Jaggard print shop.
Ah, okay, yeah,
and
that tracks.
They're probably bringing that in. They've already spent the money to get the portrait of Shakespeare, and they've got the woodcut that they actually printed separately. So they printed the rest of the page, and then they went back and printed just this in a blank space. So
okay, cool.
They'd already done that. And so this, they probably went into a blank space, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, that makes sense. I can't believe I finally asked a question you don't 100% know the answer to. It took, what, 7 years? It's taken almost 10 years. I finally did it, y'all. But thank you, Jennifer. That's really interesting to me. Thank you for that information.
Okay. So again, this is so much, and I want to take a moment and just send good thoughts into the universe to the spirit of John Leeson, because for years and years, people have bemoaned this one compositor. And some people call it compositor, some people say hand, and then a number. I always forget if it's hand D or hand E, but they have figured out like which people in general. They didn't have names to go along with this, though we do now. But they would say A probably edited these things because they did these stylistic things. They used these spellings. Again, we're before spelling was standard. But there was one set that were done so badly, that had so many mistakes, that people just would like throw their fists at the heavens and want to just strangle this guy because he made so many errors. But now we know more about him. So again, good thoughts in the universe to John Leeson. This is a time when apprenticeships to become a proper printer took 7 years. 4 months into his apprenticeship, they threw him into Shakespeare. You saw how complicated this is to set the type for all of this, with your boss behind you watching, and you freaking out, having to read that handwriting. So lots of people over the years have given him a really hard time. Knowing that he is at the beginning of his first job makes me think about like all the mistakes I made as I was learning how to do my first job. No one should be judged for that. So good thoughts to John Leeson, to even out all of those editors grumbling at him over the years. But man, there are some plays that do have a lot of errors. So we are now to the paper, and I am using the word paper generically. So my next question to you is, what is actually meant by this? So on my screen, yeah, here, well, I've got when the first folio was printed. We're actually on the next one, the pages of the first folio. What were they made from? Were they made from papyrus? Were they made from paper, as in wood? Were they made from vellum, the skins of animals, or linen rags? All of these were used for writing for books at different time periods. Which one was used for the first folio?
Okay, I have always thought it was vellum, and I thought that because I was taught that. So if I am wrong, then I know exactly who to complain to. But I was taught that and I wasn't taught it in a Shakespeare class. I was taught it in a stagecraft class because they were teaching me how to do drafting. And they gave us vellum, and I was like, oh, this is like impossible paper. This is crazy. Why would anyone use this for anything? Also, it's insanely expensive. And someone said, yeah, well, that, it's the same kind of paper that a Bible is printed on. And I was like, that doesn't make any sense because vellum is almost see-through. Now, I've seen pages of similar books. I haven't actually gotten to see a First Folio in person yet. But it is very thin. So I don't think that it's vellum. As a seamstress, I don't think it's linen rags. Unless they were like repressed and this is one of those gotcha moments. So I would say papyrus or vellum, because papyrus is like thin, crackles, but I also remember papyrus cracking with age. And a lot of these pages, while they're folded, are a lot more like linen. So anyway, I just talked an entire circle and I still don't know the answer.
But you left out paper. Are you discounting the possibility that I did a double bluff and it actually is paper?
Well, so you know how I guess I could turn my camera on for a second. Oh wait, no, I can't. Just kidding. So you know how there is a thought process that like when you are it's the idea that two things happened in history at the same time and you're utterly unaware that those two things ever happened in history at the same time. I don't imagine paper mills and Shakespeare being in the world at the same time. I don't imagine loggers floating paper downstream to a paper mill at the same time. So that's why I discount paper. Although I now certainly feel that I have made a grave mistake.
Okay. So what, I see one answer for linen rags. Anybody for Facebook feeling
particular? Let's find out.
Yeah.
This is what I get for attempting to turn on my camera, and now I can't do more than one thing at once. I did not have an answer as of a second ago. So if I do grab one, I'll leave.
So I could actually say the person on Zoom is correct. These were made from linen rags. And yes, when you were talking in circles, you were absolutely right. They were remushed together and everything. They were not just pieces of linen. So you may think that recycling and upcycling are new concepts. Oh no. They absolutely had tons of linen rags in early modern Europe. And so these would be your handkerchiefs, these would be your napkins, these would be tablecloths, shirts, shifts, and those get worn out eventually. And so when they get worn out, you can sell them to a I still am going to call it paper for ease, company to turn into book pages. And they would absolutely, so everybody benefits here. You can go and have a little bit of money to put toward new linens, but any kind of rags, they take down back into fibers. They put in the frames to make a page, they dry them out, and they make it work. So the other interesting thing is nobody in England was good enough at this process to have paper worthy of making books. And so Shakespeare's Folio is made using not the very best paper, but medium fine paper. And so you actually get complaints in England after they've ordered their pages from Normandy that Shakespeare is being printed on better paper than most Bibles. Oops. But they have lasted over the years, maybe in a better way than paper would have. So this is absolutely made of linens.
I mean, truly, if you do come see the complete works of William Shakespeare abridged, In the very opening, you definitely get to hear Rain and Denise, two of our actors, talk about strange connections between Shakespeare and the Bible. I will admit that it's utterly irreverent, but as is the rest of the show. So there's another little Easter egg for everyone to come see.
Who knew? So in this picture, you can see a little bit more of the texture of the pages, and how they have some impressions. Now with that in my head, I can't help but seeing these as slightly more akin to handkerchief like pages. It is interesting seeing those, the fact that it's not completely straight. So with this, you could buy it three ways. You could buy it unbound. You could buy it with a soft binding like a paperback, and then add your own later, or you could buy it bound in leather. And people would often buy it unbound and have their own signature libraries binding to it. And the interesting thing with all of this is every copy on the screen is the same book. These are all Shakespeare's Folio. Some of them are probably missing some material like this one. This one clearly has its binding dying, and this is where you get books becoming shorter or less wide, because then you need to rebind it, and when you sew through it, you're going to use up a little bit more of the space. If you have weird tops of pages that aren't straight, you might cut those to make them straight. And one thing that I learned with all of this is all of the fancy gilding that some copies have, they're not just to look special, they also give the pages more protection, so that they age better. So all of these things to keep in mind, but the original size was a little bit longer, not wider than a regular page of paper. So those are 8.5 by 11. This is 8 3/4 by 13.5. Sorry, I confusingly put that in the wrong order. But just think about a regular page on each side and then taller. So these are sizable books. And here,
if you come see the complete works, the book that we have that is the complete works book, it is not a copy of the first folio, but it is a complete works book, is about that dimension. Yes, so if you come see the play, you can see that in physical form, because we've got a book that is just about that exact dimension, plus or minus about a few, like I think plus an inch on the side, so like on the front of the book. So
nice.
Tell us about this what I'm assuming is an air-conditioned place to hide these books or to protect them.
Yeah, this is where one person's collection of the folios. We'll talk more about it later, but again, everything in this image is a first folio. It may have more pages or fewer pages, but everyone is at least a partial first folio with that wide range of bindings. So now, how do we get from there to the craziness associated with Shakespeare now, where if you look behind me, there's all kinds of, I have Shakespeare pillows, I have Shakespeare toys, I have a Shakespeare necklace. People have made books, Shakespearean versions of Clueless, Back to the Future, Mean Girls, as well as all of the Star Wars books, movies into books. Shakespeare is a thing in our time. If we say Shakespeare, everybody knows what you mean. So how did we get here? What I want to do is link how that first book has led to all this crazy. Okay, so with this, we've been talking about the first folio of 1623. I want to bring in the other three. We've got the second folio 9 years later. It took 9 years to sell out and create a new one. So 1632, this was not a better copy. In fact, there are more errors in the second folio than there are in the first one. Then we get the third folio, which now has Pericles, as well as a bunch of other plays that we now do not attribute to Shakespeare. It's published in 1664. And finally, the fourth folio, and the last big old folio edition of Shakespeare's plays in 1685. So we're now to our sixth question, which is, which of these Shakespeare folios is now considered the rarest, the hardest to find? And I will say, to me, there's a little bit of a clue in the dates of these.
Okay, so if we look at the dates, is one of them around the time of a fall of a kingdom? And or we know that the Black Plague was, we know that the plague was during Shakespeare's time. That's when the globe closed. So is one of these around the time of a very large war?
I would say similar issue.
Similar issue, okay.
Similar issue. We do have the British Civil War in the middle of two of these, to be clear, but this is more adjacent to that than directly that.
Okay. While we're giving some other folks a chance to answer, what I will say is that the icon for the show that we're working on, the Complete Works of William Shakespeare Abridged, that I created, is actually a conglomerate of both of a picture of the original of the first folio, the one from 1623, and it is actually a fair use of a re-illustration of that photo, which is when Sotheby's sold that copy of the first folio, and it went for millions of dollars, $4 million, I think, or was it 10? Oh gosh, millions of dollars. And then the image of Shakespeare that I used to pop out of it was from our early days back on the square, where we had him coming out of a manhole covered in sewer water. I did, however, spruce him up a little bit and remove the sewer water in the re-illustration of it. But if you find our posters around town, you can check him out. I put him popping out of a copy of the first folio, and that is actually a photo of the first folio that I digitized and re-illustrated. So kudos to that gorgeous photo of that beautiful book. We've got a guess for the first folio. I'm gonna guess that it would be the first, because someone else over here on Facebook guessed the third folio. I will admit that I've never seen a copy of the third folio. Actually, I'm looking at it now, and I've never seen a copy of that book. I've seen the fourth and I've seen the first, okay. And vis-a-vis the second, because they look almost identical to me.
Yeah.
So
okay.
So I'm going to go with the third. I'm going to agree with this with Facebook.
So you had talked about like war or something that would cause a lot of destruction. Well, the event that has caused the most destruction to London was the Great Fire of London, where 3/4 of the city burned. And that happened. Do you know the year?
I don't.
Okay. 1666. Think 666. Easy to remember. And so they actually hadn't sold all of the copies yet of the third folio. They had sold many, but not all of them. And at the time, and in Shakespeare's time, the printing industry was right next to St. Paul's Cathedral. So they could see the fire coming. All of the publishers did what they had done with fires in the past, which is put them in the basement of St. Paul's to keep them safe. Nobody is ever going to burn down St. Paul's, so that is the best place for them. Well,
that's what you think.
Yeah. The roof of St. Paul's catches fire, caves in, destroys everything on the bottom. So most of the publishers were absolutely wiped out. And that's the copies that were still there. think about how many copies would have gone to homes in London, just regular houses in London. So
Oh,
both the privately owned and the extra copies are now gone. So it is actually the rarest. It's not the most valuable, but it is the rarest. So if you ever really want a copy of the third folio, buy it while it's on sale.
that's crazy. But yeah, that makes sense. Like I said, I've never seen that one because of the crest on that second page.
Yeah.
Now I'm gonna go find that crest and put it in my little icon hoard of photos and images that I use all the time. Because I think that the small images like that are incredibly interesting to people, you know, like we've seen these photos of Shakespeare a million times, you know, and it's really interesting to be able to provide a different look to a thing that people are so incredibly dedicated to. So I'm super proud of our Facebook user who found that and knew that it was the third one. I'm glad I went with you, and I love it. That's so cool. It's not cool that there was a huge fire. That's really sad. But it is pretty, that's a really neat fact. And it is ironic that that is the one that is full of stuff that wasn't written by Shakespeare. It's almost as if he said, someone move these stones. I got to get over here and start a fire. Those aren't my place.
Although the fourth folio did okay. Oh, and the other fun thing is so many places got rid of their first folio when the third one came around, since it had so many more plays in it.
Oh no.
One, not realizing that actually the text of everything was best in the first folio. There are more errors to the text in each one as it goes. Fun. So with all of this, we have these 4 folios. Each one of these is a huge book. It's expensive. It's only going to be bought by someone who's rich. And you're certainly not going to carry it around with you. Think about if you grew up in a house with an old family Bible, you don't have those around. It stays in place. And so the times were about to change. And so the big changing point is the Statute of Anne in 1710, which is the first modern copyright law. And this was obviously in Britain, later on happened in the US, but you get with Britain some interesting publishers who decide that, well, they need to get as many of these copyrights of these works as possible before the statute goes into effect. So Mr. Johnson is the foremost publisher of his time. He's the only one who took a chance on John Milton. He's the one with his finger to the pulse of what people want. And so he decides to go find all of these old authors, and Shakespeare was one among many, and get them. And then to stay in copyright, he needs an edition. So we have the first, what we would call edition, in the sense that they went through, they made changes from the original, they fixed things that they thought weren't right. And Nicholas Rowe is the first one to do this. And it's in an edition where the plays are divided into 6 volumes, so you could carry one around with you. And importantly, now Taunton has his copyright. He can go with this, but you have to keep publishing. So his next version, why not go with the amazing new writer, Alexander Pope? The only problem, amazing writer, lousy editor. So lazy. They got like all of the early editions around and he did nothing with them. And so you get somebody who's the exact opposite, lousy writer, excellent editor, Louis Theobald, who calls him on it in the most public way possible. He publishes a book about what Pope got wrong just in Hamlet alone. All of these examples, and it is published in the same size and shape as the rest of these volumes of Shakespeare. So you could put it on your mantelpiece next to it and get the right versions. So let's just say this destroyed Pope's reputation as an editor. And when Taunton needed to create the next edition, why, it's by Mr. Theobald. But what I love is that he didn't take it well. And I'll give you a chance to talk in just a second, but I need to add this one more bit in because, oh, Mr. Pope. Alexander Pope basically threw a hissy fit in the way that only a great poet can. He wrote an epic poem about how the British public is just losing its culture. And he blamed the Queen that he'd had a falling out with, and he blamed Theobald. And so people absolutely wrote off Theobald as being this boring guy. And he ended up dying in obscurity after this, despite being the first truly great editor of Shakespeare and doing so much. Yeah, we had all of this. Caitlin, did you want to add something?
In college, shout out to Maryville College's English department, because I learned and theater and just the university in general, but I had a great education there. And I remember one day someone talking about how Alexander Pope was just their favorite writer and really looked up to them, and and really enjoyed the work. And one of my professors going on about a 20-minute tangent about how Alexander Pope was the biggest baby on the planet because he couldn't stand that somebody called him out about how terrible his treatment of Hamlet was, and then proceeded to give us a free bonus essay question about if you got like a free 15 points if you could remember why this professor hated Alexander Pope, because you just happened to be in class that day. And so that's one of my favorite Alexander Pope stories, of the idea of Alexander Pope just being like, I don't wanna, you guys stink, I'm not playing anymore.
And not only that, I'm going to go write an epic poem about why you're so dumb.
Yeah, and it stinks that he won that argument,
But no one hired him to edit anything else. He was the national poet, but no one edited any. But Taunton is not done. Oh no. We still have our biggest Taunton story to go. Here is the problem. He forgot to publish. He lost his copyright because he forgot to publish, but this is the beginning of copyright. He thinks, well, that shouldn't stop me. And so when Robert Walker puts out his own version, Jacob Taunton throws his own little hissy fit. After all, he is friends with Pope, or at least was before hiring Theobald. And so we get this huge war of words between the two. And this is absolutely on principle. He's wanting to make sure that this is not setting a precedent where anybody can steal, as he sees it, his work, even though it is now technically, he lost the copyright because he didn't publish another edition soon enough. But he goes to Walker, he tries to bribe him, he tries to undercut him in prices, he does everything that he can. He puts tons of copies out there trying to get Robert Walker to back down, and he doesn't. And so I've got, and I love that Robert Walker even upped the ante, because Jacob Taunton for more than 20 years had his shop at the sign of Shakespeare's Head. This is a time when most people didn't read. So even a printer, if you're sending your servant to go pick up a package and buy something, they may not be able to read the sign. So they go to the sign of Shakespeare's Head. Robert Walker sets up his own shop at a sign of Shakespeare's Head. So he has stolen this and is, like, as Taunton sees it, he's trying to steal all of his business. So it all comes down to Shakespeare. And I love this advertisement that was in the back of a copy of All's Well That Ends Well. And I just want to draw your attention to the bottom half of this page, whereas Robert Walker has proposed to pirate all Shakespeare's plays, but through ignorance of what plays are Shakespeare's, did in several advertisements propose to print Oedipus, King of Thebes by Sophocles as one of Shakespeare's plays, and has since printed Tait's King Lear. This is named Tait's Happily Ever After King Lear instead of Shakespeare's, and in Hamlet has admitted almost half of the genuine editions. The world will therefore judge how likely they are to have a complete collection of Shakespeare's plays from the said R. Walker. I love fighting words. And by the way, Robert Walker came back and said, I'm doing the version that is all the rage on the stage. You are doing these outdated versions that no one wants to see anyway. I'm doing the current cuts. And he also had this great bit at the bottom of one of his. So the Tragedy of Antony and Cleopatra, published by Tonson and his accomplices, is printed from an erroneous edition and very incorrect and mangled. Therefore, this is to give notice to my subscribers and others that on Thursday next, the same tragedy will be published by me from the genuine edition, and great care shall be taken that the same shall be correct and beautifully printed to render that as well as all my other plays worth four pennies, 4 pence, than those maimed scraps published by Tonson at 3 pence, threepence. So he say they may cost less, but my versions are better. And so it's this war of low prices and war of words, exchanging all these insults. But in the meantime, there are more copies or more volumes in these editions. And so maybe you have 3 or 4 plays in something that costs 3 pence or 4 pence. And so you're basically getting a play for a penny. That had never happened before. Normal people could not afford to buy Shakespeare until this stupid, ridiculous rivalry. And so they flooded the market. And this is where everybody suddenly knows Shakespeare's name, because copies are everywhere. I love, like, in this age of Amazon, this is the first time Tonson promised to deliver outside of London to anyone who bought a copy. We had all of these modern ideas going just with Shakespeare. So then the next step in Shakespeare, going from everywhere to as Shakespeare the man, the writer, to Shakespeare the myth, we get David Garrick, who is an actor, director. He also was a playwright. These are 2 pictures of him as Richard III in Hamlet, both of which these are the poses when he sees a ghost. So obviously, hand out, seeing a ghost. Remember that in case you ever seen one in person. I also wanted to include the Hamlet picture because of all of the props in Shakespeare, all of the stagecraft, the one that I most would like to see is his wig for Hamlet. He had devised himself a wig where his hair stood on end when he saw the ghost. How do you do this in the 1760s? I don't know. Without electrocuting yourself. I want to know. I want to know. But he took great pains to always associate himself with Shakespeare. Here he is with Shakespeare's bust. He actually creates a temple to Shakespeare on the banks of the Thames. So making Shakespeare into, to borrow a phrase, the god of my idolatry. And so we get to our question number 7. What single event turned Shakespeare into an entire industry, complete with pilgrimages and different types of merchandise? So is it first the premiere of the complete works of William Shakespeare abridged? Is it the Shakespeare Jubilee? Is it the Shakespeare Revolution? Or is it the Shakespeare Flibbertigibbet? Which it definitely should be, because that's the most fun to say.
It is the most fun to say. So earlier I mentioned that, sorry, I'm in here putting this question in for Facebook because I set it up for our Zoom folks, but then didn't set it up for our Facebook folks. And it's a long one, so I'm just going to copy it into the chat so everyone can check it out if they want to. So earlier I mentioned that one of the things that is my favorite about like my work that I've been doing with Shakespeare is those titles and those like the pages at the end, the placards at the end with all of the icons and the different imagery that's important to these, various old versions of printings. And one of the most prolific ones that I used a lot of was David Garrick. A lot of David Garrick's illustrations were all, some of my favorite illustrations. There's this one particular illustration for Richard II where it is a pillow, and the pillow is like sitting on a table, and a crown, a hollow crown, is sitting on the pillow, and inside that pillow is a little skeleton, a little dead man, wearing his own little tiny crown. And it looks as if he is floating down a boat of like the river Styx, right? It looks like as if he's floating down a boat to the afterlife. And that imagery of a small, a symbolization of death in the form of like a skeleton being over Richard the whole time was something that was really, really popular in a lot of that imagery. And so David Garrick, I don't know if he started it or participated in it, but his was definitely some of my favorite imagery used in those illustrations of the scenes in Richard II, and I really enjoyed it. So we've got a guest for the Shakespeare Jubilee, and we've got a guest for the Shakespeare Jubilee and another guest for the Shakespeare Jubilee. I would guess the Jubilee because that seems like a normal celebration in which people, and in celebrations like festivals, right? People like to buy stuff. So I'm going to go with the Shakespeare Jubilee.
And you guys are all absolutely right. Here is our lovely ticket for this. In Stratford upon Avon, he got all of the people from London and high society to go to Stratford for a Shakespeare Palooza. And here's the thing. It was absolute, I'm trying to think of a word bad enough. It was horrible. Everything that could have happened. Well, I don't think anybody died, but the River Avon flooded the entire town. And all of this was supposed to be happening in this massive tent that they had erected next to the riverside. Couldn't go out, like the ladies' shoes were all like completely stuck. It was absolutely there was supposed to be a fancy dress ball that got rained out. It was bad. But he managed to salvage it because the play that he created for this, imaginatively called Jubilee, he decided to keep playing it when he went back to London. He did it like 20 times that season. And so he kind of convinced everybody that it actually was a success, even though if you were there, it totally wasn't. But it absolutely jump-started Shakespeare's reputation, taking him from a good playwright to Shakespeare, the way that we think of him today. And man, when I say there was merch, my personal favorite is this tankard, like the way that we would buy a water bottle or a coffee mug. They had a tankard literally with Shakespeare's face on the side. Well, not just his face, his whole person. So we have that. They had lockets that were made from the wood of Shakespeare's tree. And by the way, this is the same tree that like everything was supposed to be made out of, from this tree that Shakespeare had raised. One of the big things in Victorian times later on was having a toothpick from this tree. And in fact, the old joke is you could have built the entire British Navy from those toothpicks. They sold so many, there's no way they were all from the tree. This one I think actually was, but it was at the start. You also get this big statue on the side of the town hall, which was in the news last year when they refurbished it. Lots of actors participated in some fundraisers for that. So it is newly refurbished if you go to Stratford-upon-Avon. But it was also the start of Shakespeare tourism, of people deliberately going to Stratford-upon-Avon to see these places. And so when the owner decided to sell the house or possibly demolish the house in the 1850s, you actually get all of England joining together to fund this and buy the Shakespeare birthplace, but with the Shakespeare birthplace trust that still is there, led by none other than Charles Dickens, who was a huge Shakespeare fan. So what did you want to add, Caitlin?
Oh, just that a lot of the plays, some of the most innovative and talked about productions of Shakespeare's works now happen at the Shakespeare Birth Trust with the Royal Shakespeare Company, RSC. And so that, and you can watch different RSC productions, you can definitely get them from your local library, but those all happen there. So I always think that's pretty cool and interesting. I would also like to ask personally, Jennifer, how many mugs you have that are Shakespeare related?
Not quite as many as you'd think. I think maybe 7. I also have a water bottle from the Globe, so we'll count that as 8. But my personal favorite from the Royal Shakespeare Company, it was on remainder, so for like £1, I got one that had the Laurence Olivier and Vivian Leigh as the Macbeths with their daggers up, which is exactly what I want to think of when I'm drinking tea.
Yeah, fight the patriarchy. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just knew that was very entertaining when you said the thing about the tankard. I was like, I wonder how many tankards our Shakespeare dramaturg has. But I love
in here. I think they're all in there where all my tea mugs are. Yeah.
Yeah, they're all in there in use, doing what they're supposed to be doing, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
All right,
Except
there we go.
Macbeth, it's in the collection upstairs.
Yes. All right, that's great. That's all so interesting. I love all of that.
So amazingly, Shakespeare's birthplace is not the most famous house in Stratford-upon-Avon. The most famous house associated with Shakespeare is actually his wife's house where she grew up, Anne Hathaway's cottage. First of all, I love that when she lived in there, it was only like this big, and then her brother, after she moved out, expanded that way. So the part that's most picturesque was not there when she was. But because it is so pretty, because it looks like ye olde England, this is what became one of the symbols during colonization, when they spread Shakespeare out to the ends of the earth along with England, whether people wanted it to or not. This was often the image associated with England. And by the way, I don't know if you can see my picture on the side of your screen, but if so, I actually have several Victorian or Edwardian postcards of Anne Hathaway's cottage. This one I just took out beforehand. It has a postmark from 1911, hand tinted. This is of the church where he was buried. So it was a whole industry. So now Shakespeare is no longer the man. He is the myth, the legend. He is England. Feel free to roll your eyes. I do. So he gets exported everywhere. So we've basically gone from the first folio to the first collections, the first volume collections, which then makes the folios not worth anything. So these are the new ones. And then you get the cheap copies so anybody can have them. And then once you have better technology and you have cameras, you can have facsimile editions and go back to Shakespeare's time so that you can actually see the original folio for yourself. And once people get obsessed with folios again, why, it's just a small leap until you get some rich guys buying up copies of those first folios. And so I want us to look at probably the most prolific of all of them, which is Henry Clay Folger. So he brings us back to those. And I don't want to only talk about him. I also want to talk about his wife, Emily, who was extraordinary. Before they married, she had graduated Vassar as class president, top of her class, Phi Beta Kappa. She later, in the first 10 years of their marriage, went back and got a master's degree at a time when most women didn't even have a high school diploma. And she got a master's degree in trying to figure Shakespeare's original intent from the editions that we have. So she knew what she was talking about with all of this as they created their collection. She absolutely worked hand in hand. We often say his name rather than hers because his name was on the documents, the men who were in the book trade, and it was the men in the book trade contacted him as a fellow man, but this was absolutely a partnership. So with this, I'm going to go back for 1 second because he became kind of a captain of industry. And so I wanted to get into at least one of the famous people that he knew. So with this, he actually used to play golf regularly with one of the most famous people of the Victorian era. Was that Thomas Edison? Was that John D. Rockefeller? Was that Sir Henry Irving, the foremost Shakespearean actor of the time and the first one to get a knighthood? Or was that Queen Victoria herself?
Okay, well, we can play the guessing game. So golf, I don't know if it's true, that whole gentlemen's only, ladies forbidden. So I would say not Queen Victoria.
But if anybody would, it would be the Queen. She would get to set the rules.
That's true. That's true. That's true. All right. So we've got a guess for John D. Rockefeller. Industry, titan of industry, though, definitely Rockefeller or Edison. So I do appreciate Rockefeller. I have also been doing lots of, we've got a guess of Henry Irving over here on Facebook. I've been doing a lot of currently been doing a lot of research on the on trains. That sounds very strange, but on the build of the use of trains across America and ironworks. And so I've been reading lots of nasty things about every Rockefeller you can imagine. And so I'm inclined to say John D. Rockefeller, but we do have a Henry Irving guest over here.
And I think Irving would be perfect because they could talk Shakespeare. The problem was Irving was mostly over in England and Folger was over in America. So sadly, that cuts out both him and the Queen.
All right.
And people are correct. It is absolutely John D. Rockefeller. So Henry Clay Folger actually is a completely self-made man. His family was kind of lower middle class, but they had so many children that he almost had to drop out of Amherst, where he was attending college, because they couldn't pay his tuition. And luckily, the parents of one of his friends gave him or loaned him the money to finish. And so that same person then, after he went to Columbia Law School, arranged for him to have a job with him at Standard Oil. which is Rockefeller's company. And he worked his way up the ranks. He became an expert at efficiency and finding the most efficient way of doing things. And so he really gained huge favor with John D. Rockefeller. And by the time that they broke up Standard Oil as a monopoly, the first president of Standard Oil of New York was none other than Henry Clay Folger. And then after that, he was chairman of the board until his retirement. So he, interestingly, never talked with Rockefeller about his book collecting, but he saw him on a regular basis. And also Henry Clay Folger created his own type of golf club and got the patent for it. Who knew? So with this, he started, first of all, I should go back one step, because the first Shakespeare purchase was he got that facsimile copy, the first facsimile copy, and gave that to his wife when they were newlyweds. And they bonded over that. And in 1889, he makes his first big Shakespeare purchase, which is a fourth folio for $100, or just over $100. I think it was 104. And he asks if he can pay in installments. He is not a big high level person yet. He is firmly in the middle class, but has prospects. And so he pays it in installments and he gets the bug. So as he's climbing the ranks, as he has more money to play with, he starts buying first folios. And he gets a lot of them over the years, but a few of them are especially important. And for everything, and this is where his wife comes back into it. Emily did a handwritten card for a card catalog. This is one of their typed ones in the Folger Shakespeare Library, but even though it's not the same, I wanted people to get an idea of what ye old card catalog looks like if you're not familiar. But they would write this by hand, what the book is, what price it is, what condition it's in, and keep a list of all the ones that they bought and all the ones that got away for possible future use. And they cross-referenced all of this so it would be easy to look up. Every trip they went on, they took this increasingly large card catalog with them. If they were going on vacation to New Jersey, they took it. If they were going to England, they took it, so that they could get the proper information. Nobody is going to pull one over on them. And it is absolutely a partnership with that. So now the first folio I want to mention is this really special one. This is the only presentation copy we know of where the publisher presented it to someone, and you see the note there with it. This is one of the other authors that the Jaggards printed, someone who was high up in heraldry for the royal family and had printed they had printed a book about heraldry. And so this is one of the most pristine copies out there. That it was one of the first copies of the picture to be done. So you can see every tiny detail that by the time they've done 742, it's not in as good shape. It's kind of gotten buffed out. And the quality is just not there, whereas this one is perfect. So he wants this one. The guy who's selling it says, okay, let's make sure you're serious. $5,000. And this is at the turn of the century. So 1901, 1902, $5,000 is a lot. And so first he says yes. And then he thinks, okay, no, I'm going to get a better deal than that. And it backfires. The seller says, no, and refuses for a long period of time, probably about a year and a half, to sell this to him. And then finally, when he does persuade him to sell, it's at twice the original price. $10,000 in 1903 money, which is almost $50,000. And it then set a record for the most expensive book ever sold. He managed to keep it quiet so that people wouldn't take advantage of him, knowing that he would pay that much money for a book. In fact, he didn't spend that much money on a single book again for a very long time, though not forever. So this was huge. And because he had almost lost it, he learned that he is going to go big or go home. If it's a one of a kind, you go for it. So when they, the Bodleian copy of the first folio came up for sale, he wanted it. Now, this is the one that when the third folio came out with those extra plays, the Bodleian Library at Oxford, that is famous for being one of those copyright libraries like the British Library, where they get a copy of everything printed, they got rid of that. And it went to a family who kept it until then. So this is actually the only copy where we know its entire history. We know where it was at all times, from when it was printed to when it was then sold. And so the people at Oxford really wanted it back. The person who was selling it actually was an Oxford man. So he thought, oh, if they can make the price, then we'll go with that. The problem is, Folger set a ridiculously high price at then $3,000. They thought it was ridiculously high because they didn't know about the 10,000, but the British public managed to raise the sum. It was in all the newspapers. We need to keep this from leaving the country and going to America. It's a matter of national pride. So after way too long, like almost a year, I think, certainly a number of months, they finally raised it. This was at a time when there were several individual people who could have easily bought it for Oxford who didn't. But eventually you get the newspaper headline, "The Shakespeare is saved from the evil American." They didn't know which American, they just knew an American. And he was so bitter that this was the one that got away. And it's still in the Bodleian to this day, that he gets even more determined to get the books that he wants. And the next one that he wanted is this Pavier Quartos edition, the False Folio, the one that William Jaggard published. At the time, this was the only copy that had all of the plays together in its original binding. Since then, two more popped up, but at the time he thought this is absolutely unique. So in 1919, he went big. And he valued this so much. He did get it. I'll go ahead and tell you that. He valued it so much that when he had his official portrait done for the Shakespeare, Folger Shakespeare Library, he is holding a book. It's the Pavier Quartos. He paid $100,000 in 1919 money. Again, setting the record for the most money ever spent on a book at that time. And he was really bitter because the bookseller who sold it to him leaked that information to the press as a bit of self-promotion. The one upside, though, was that every book dealer from then on talked to him if they were going to sell something Shakespeare related. So, not all copies of the first folio are in good condition. Not all are the same. The thing about Folger is he didn't care. He knew that each one was slightly different and might have differences in the editing. So he wanted as many as he could get. He was not particular. He, though, had a good idea of the relative value. So he's not going to pay as much for a lousy copy, but if he can get it, he will. So I love this picture where you can clearly see someone has cut this and pasted it into this copy of the book. This is what people started to do. If there's a page missing, replace it. And this started around the time of the Revolutionary War. Actually, people started prizing the first folio again, and then it comes back as people in Folger's era at the turn of the 20th century are buying this. So they're replacing pages that are missing, and they might replace it with copies from the first folio, from the second, third, or even fourth folio. They might just cut out what they need and paste it into a new page. They might do all sorts of different things, and some of them are really good, and you couldn't have told that that's what it was. Some maybe they're marked up and people are horrified. Now we prize that because we want to see what was marked up by earlier generations. And maybe if a page has ripped, what I find fascinating about this is they match the kind of page, and everything on this side of the rip is actually hand painted to look as though it was printed. It's hand painted, hand lettered to match. And that just boggles my mind. Evidently, some people were so good at it that you have to check the watermark of the paper to realize that it's not a real First Folio page. But one of the things that Folger decided to do was buy extra copies where someone had cut up a folio and they just had loose leaf pages to add back in because someone had already started destroying this for another book and they just had a bunch of pages. They actually have not cataloged yet all of those pages. So with this, I also wanted to point out some of these notes in the margins can become so important. This was found at a library in Philadelphia, and they are pretty sure that these comments, this particular handwriting is by John Milton. So it can be really fascinating to see what different people have written about Shakespeare in those margins. So Folger ends up with 82 copies of the First Folio. I think this is 78 or 79 of those. There are a lot. So a few statistics: 168 early modern quarto editions of the plays and poems of Shakespeare's plays and poems, 82 first folios, 58 second folios. Of those rare third folios, he still has 23, and 39 fourth folios. And then you get all of it, not just the Shakespeare, 277,000, of which 173,000 are rare books. You also get 65,000 published between 1475 and 1700, including more than 55% of the known titles published before 1640. This blows my mind. All of the things that we might not have if they weren't gathered together. The thing that's even more amazing to me as a theater historian who loves the ephemera. I love playbills and handbills. I have several handbills that I showed in the Taming of the Shrew Shakesology. They have over 500,000 playbills, handbills, programs, things like that, not all of which have even been cataloged now, almost 100 years later. It is truly amazing how much they have. And all of this is now in the Folger Shakespeare Library that is just down the street from the Capitol building, and it's just behind the Library of Congress. It is done as a Shakespeare law, or as an Elizabethan lodge. There's a theater inside. There are frescoes, or friezes rather. And if you have the chance to pause and look at this great cartoon from Good Tickle Brain, where it celebrates a place where Shakespeare nerds can unite, I love it. But Folger was not the only, so they were working together through all of this. And I really want to celebrate the fact that it is an equal partnership that produced this amazing place. And sadly, he died just before the construction was completed. But he made sure to put in his will that they had to allow Emily to take all of the books as she wanted. So to this day, she's the only one who's ever had like checkout privileges at the Shakespeare Library. Everybody else has to stay on site. She could do whatever she wanted. And she absolutely was the heart and soul of the library for the rest of her life. So Folger is not the only collector, and we're going to mention Huntington, but as we think about his library and other libraries around the world, we have our penultimate question: what 4 places have the most First Folio copies? And you're not going to be too surprised that the first answer for all of these is the Folger. So the Folger Shakespeare Library, the Meisei University in Tokyo, the New York Public Library, and the British Library. B is the Folger, the British Library, the Huntington Library, and the Victoria and Albert Museum. C is the Folger, the British Library, Shakespeare's Globe Theatre, and the Royal Shakespeare Company. D is the Folger, Shakespeare Birthplace Trust, British Library, and the Library of Congress. I know, evil.
All right. So we've got a guess already for A, Meisei University, New York Public Library, and the British Library. I will say that we don't have any guesses on Facebook. Oh, we've got a guess for D on Facebook. Okay. I was also going to guess D, but this is why. So when I do my my dramaturgical work for all of the shows, when I'm getting ready for shows I'm directing, or I acted as dramaturg for Richard II, and so I do a lot of iconography Googling, and I do find a lot of photo pages from the Library of Congress. I see a lot of things from the Library of Congress and the British Library. So the British Library and the Library of Congress are the two places that I find the most information, where it's easy to find, easy to get to, not behind a paywall. Some of the stuff for British Library is behind a paywall, but like not nearly as much. I want to say Shakespeare's Birthplace because I feel that deep in my heart, I guess. I don't know. Maybe because it's a trust.
I will say the Shakespeare's Birthplace. That's the first place I ever saw a first folio, and that's still the only one I've seen that was not behind glass. When I did my master's, they let us in a small room. Only the professor, who is one of the Oxford complete works of Shakespeare editors, was allowed to touch it. But we were there. We were breathing the same air. So
so that makes sense. And then Folger, obviously to me. I also know that when or side note, I guess, whenever we are putting together our scripts for the seasons every year, the first place that we go is we pull the copy from MIT and from Folger, because you can literally just Google like the Taming of the Shrew script and Folger's printed script, and MIT, yes, Massachusetts Institute of Technology is the other one that has a copy of the script.
I think that MIT was the very first one to do it because they were on the cutting edge of technology with printing things on the web.
Yeah. And so those are the two places that I see them, that we pull them the most, and they each have their own errors. And they're always different. They're never the same. Can't keep you on your toes. Yep. But they do always have the same errors. And, ironically enough, they may be on the cutting edge of technology, but it's the same line in Lear every time that we have to correct, because Tom and I always forget that it's printed incorrectly. And Reagan, who I played when we did it, Regan, I said the line wrong, and I learned it wrong, and then spent every single time before I did the show trying to remember to not say one word incorrectly. So I think so. My guess is D. And we've got a guess on Facebook for D, and then we've got a guess over here for A. So where are we landing?
Well, I will say one of those two is correct. We will cut out B and C completely. Okay. So obviously, I think Huntington is a good guess, but he realized Folger was all about the Shakespeare, so he diversified more. If you go to his library, they have so many treasures, but it's a really wide range. So he only has 4 copies, which doesn't quite make the list of the top 4. Only 4. But he also has a Shakespeare garden with every flower and plant mentioned in Shakespeare. So at least that's something.
I want to go there.
I know. It's so gorgeous. Actually, the second most is at the Meisei University in Tokyo, where they have their own Globe Theater there. In the 80s and 90s, they went on a buying spree. I will say, when I did my master's, out of a group of approximately 25 people, at least a quarter of the students were Japanese. Shakespeare is hugely beloved in Japan. They brought in so many productions in the Victorian era that has been around for a long time now. And by the way, if you're interested, there is now an amazing resource for Asian productions of Shakespeare with videos that is free. So if you Google Asian Shakespeare, it is wonderful. So seeing people turn Shakespeare into, like, combine it with their own cultures, their own styles of theater. Just have to put in that plug. Okay, so the next is the New York Public Library. When you think about all the robber barons and who was buying the first folios, and then when they die, who they're going to leave it to, New York Public Library actually makes some sense. And then with 5 copies, we have the British Library. And this is the picture from their big blockbuster exhibition in 2016. I was lucky enough to go to, and they had 5 copies, and I think they had a few more loaned from places like the V&A and the Globe. In addition to that, it was a embarrassment of riches. So these are spread out around the world. It is kind of amazing. So now I want to switch gears just a little bit as we're winding up and think about this census. One of the amazing things about the First Folio is this is one of the few books in the world where we have a history of so many copies of the book. Even at this point, there's only a handful of books that have this. Audubon's Birds of America, the Gutenberg Bible, Darwin's On the Origin of Species. It is a small number where we know where they've gone. The first person who did this has the amazing name of Reverend Thomas Frognall Dibdin in 1824, though he only identified 45 copies. It was still a start, but Sir Sidney Lee actually really did a huge amount of work, and his census gave Folger a run for his money. Folger was trying to buy up as many as possible before Sidney Lee put this out, but then afterwards, Folger kind of used this census as a shopping list and had his buyers go after the people who had private copies and who didn't plan to sell and tried to convince them to sell. So he found 156. By the way, he always got Folger's number way too low. Like when he thought that Folger had 4, he had like 12. When he thought he had 24, he had like 50. It was always way too low. You had several, including Otness, over the course of the 20th century. The next big project of this was with Anthony James West, and this is ongoing, but he has found such a staggering number. And what makes him different is he'd made lots of money in the business world, and he used that to travel the world and add in lots of information about each individual copy. So we know so much about which copies have which errors, which copy have which marginalia, and other people have built on that. Eric Rasmussen, who later on did this descriptive catalog with West. And I will say I didn't get Emma Smith on there because she hasn't published something that's just that. But she has done a lot of groundbreaking work, and Emma Smith, Rasmussen, and West are the 3 people who have, in the last 20 years, identified new copies of the First Folio, or new to us. So here are the crazy statistics. So approximately 750 were printed. We now know about 235. 50 are still in the UK, 149 in the US, 36 elsewhere. And then only, of all of those, only 27 are privately owned, and 2 of those are on public display. So it's really rare that they come up for auction, which leads us to our next question, our last question, which is how much, not adjusted for inflation, has the most expensive First Folio copy sold for so far? Is it 1.2 million? Is it 5.17 million? Is it 9.98 million? Or is it 15.5 million?
So if
Again,
you were listening earlier, I almost gave it away, and then I was like, wait, hold on, I think it might be something else, just to throw all of you off, because as soon as it came out of my mouth, I was like, oops.
did not absolutely give me a heart attack then. No, not at all.
I'm so sorry. I didn't even see it in your face. You're such a good actor. As soon as I said it, I was like, oh, wait a minute. I think that's one of the questions. So I did throw it off. I will say that neither of the numbers I gave were correct, although were fully correct, although one of them is the right answer, if you know what I mean. So if you were listening earlier, then you've got to guess. We have one guess for 15.5 million. I will say inflation has been nuts. So perhaps I am off on my inflation calculation.
Not adjusted for inflation.
Not adjusted for inflation.
Not.
Oh, okay, great. Cool. Yeah. So
we're just looking for the number that they paid, not how much it's worth now.
Got it. So we've got one guess for 5.1 or for 5.17.
Oh, okay.
No, over here we've got 5.17 million on Facebook. Sorry, like you can see what I'm talking about. Also, like you can see my hands. I've moved my camera and you can't even see where my hands are anymore. So over in Facebook land, we've got a guess for 5.17. Over here in Zoom, we've got a 15.5. I'm not going to guess because I know the answer. And I know the answer because of it was Sotheby's that sold the most expensive one. And the article that I read was from NPR, and that's where that photo was taken from. Mm-hmm. So it was a beautiful copy. Should I ask,
do you know that one sold in May of this year?
Oh yeah, that's right.
So that might revise your answer a little bit.
Yes, it does revise my answer. Okay, yeah. So one sold in May of this year, and then that other one, which is that photo, was Sotheby's. Yes. Okay, great. Yes. So the first one.
Rather than they reveal this, I think I'm just going to show you the two of the three most recent sales. First of all, last July, a copy that was not one of the best copies sold for 2.4 million. Not too bad. I mean, it's almost reasonable. Like maybe no, I totally couldn't. No. I could dream about that one. But the one that you are absolutely thinking about is the one that sold in 2020 for 9.98 million. And that actually is still the record. I'm shocked that it hasn't gone up. And this was a beautiful copy. It was a pretty much perfect copy. But as I was doing my research, I was shocked to see that one had sold in May. There were lots of articles about it in March and April when it was up for sale. And by the way, at the time they had one of each folio. The second folio is still for sale. So if you want to go to Peter Harrington Rare Books, feel free to go. I will say they have the catalog that has all of these details about all of the four folios, the four editions, or the particular copies of the folios, and the first complete collected poetry. It's insane. But it was only 8 million or 6.25 pounds. So yeah, it's slight disappointment. Maybe more I could pay that. Yeah, no, still. So if you get the second folio, please let me see it. I won't touch it. I won't breathe on it. I just want to see it. Okay. So if you can't afford these, every so often they find a new one. I will say the most recent one that was announced is one that the people always knew they had it. They just hadn't shared it. These are the last two that people didn't realize. And this one that is from Saint-Omer in France, a very old public library that they came originally from a monastery's library. This was one where they knew they had a Shakespeare, but they had misidentified it. They had thought it was about 100 years younger than it was, and thus less important. And then in 2014, they're looking through and they're like, this looks this looks like it might be a folio. And so they bring Eric Rasmussen, who happened to be, he's American. He happened to be in London. And so he hopped the pond and was like, oh, this is wow. So it was confirmed. And even more recently in 2016, they realized someone cataloged this private library on a Scottish island because it was divided up into 3 volumes. No one had paid much attention to it. Evidently, the woman who had bought it, she died in 1900. And so it had been a while since someone was aware of it. So it was just hidden away on a shelf. They had no idea what they had. She did back then, but no one did. And so Emma Smith, who has done a number of these more recent books, was the one to verify that. So
Can you imagine being like the intern in that French? I just imagine that it was just like a new person walking in with new eyes and was like, guys, this is a first folio. And they're like, no, dear, you don't understand. It's not. And he's like, yeah, it is. Can you imagine being that person? And could you also imagine being like the special collection librarian whose job it was to buy and source that book? Yeah. Well, I would just be like, hey, look what a good deal I got, because she didn't pay a ton of money. It's like, look at the deal. And also I would like to point out in the folio divided up into 3 sections, you can definitely see the difference between these 2 photos of the gold gilding edge on the side of the folio found in the Scottish island versus the one in the French library, where you're seeing the lack of gilding on the edges, and you can see, aside from the fact that it was in a library, so it's going to be taken down and used, and we don't know what condition it was given to them in, but you can definitely see how you have less of the shearing on the edge of the page with the gold gilding and all of that. And so that's really interesting to look at and see how that changed it,
And seeing them side by side, you wouldn't guess that that's the same book.
Nope. No.
Which I just find so fascinating. So if you have like ancestors or somebody that who has an old book collection, check it out. Some of them,
go take a look.
Yeah, double check. You never know. And all of this is absolutely up to date, because Tuesday of this week, King Charles just had people come in to see these first folios. By the way, this is Gregory Doran, who used to be head of the RSC, who has a new book out about directing the folio. He's directed every play in it, and I'm partially through. It's amazing. But some of the best Shakespearean actors out there: Simon Russell Beale, Harriet Walter Ray Fearon. And in the audience, you have Vanessa Redgrave and Judi Dench. It was truly an embarrassment of riches. And if Charles has long been known as a fan of Shakespeare, if you have not seen this clip, there's a shortened version of it on YouTube where all of the amazing actors, Judi Dench, Ian McKellen, Benedict Cumberbatch, David Tennant, are coming out to show the new actor who is playing Hamlet, Papa Essiedu, how to say what word to emphasize, and to be or not to be, that is the question. And so, of course, Prince Charles gets the last word, and he gets it right. So if you've always wondered which is the right word, check that out. I want to make sure people know about this amazing website that several organizations came together and created for this year. It has so much great information. You'll recognize some of the pictures I used, but free. It has everything that's in the folio. It has information about the people, how it was done, where you can go to find them. Celebration things that are going on. Like I said, the actual anniversary is in November, so it's going on all year, and some amazing essays by the best in Shakespeare. If you just look up Folio 400, it will come up. I also particularly recommend these 2 books. There are so many scholarly books. These are 2 fun books. And like I did Book of William as an audiobook. I've enjoyed it. I have actually listened to that several times now, but it has a good overall history. And then this one focuses more on Folger, but it brings us back to the complete works of William Shakespeare abridged. Here are the times that you can go see this particular production, including tomorrow night. So why don't we hear from Caitlin about the this production?
Yeah. So this is the second time that I've directed the complete works of William Shakespeare abridged, which is something that I am incredibly proud of and very happy to have done. I really am truly enjoying, I enjoyed the process with this new cast, as well as enjoyed the process of producing this season in general. This is the first time, I'm so sad. This is the first time, this is my 10th summer on the square. I know, it's my 10-year anniversary, it's crazy. So it's my 10th summer on the square, and being my 10th summer on the square, this is the first season where Tom and I have separated. And we didn't actually realize it until we were getting into rehearsals, and we suddenly had the realization that like, oh, wait a minute, we won't be in the same room. So we need 2 copies of this thing, and we need 2 copies of the pronunciation book, and we need 2 copies of this of our multiple dictionaries. We've got a couple of sections of dictionaries that are every word that's ever said in Shakespeare, and then we've got pronunciation guides. If we're not just like texting Jennifer, how do I say this, which happens more than I'm sure any of us would like to admit. So we're having a lot of fun with it. Here is a hand copy of one of the productions of one of the things, and you'll notice that this says abridged revised. And when you see that, it's because the first production of the complete works of William Shakespeare abridged was in 1987. And then so Jennifer Horn saw it in 1987.
No. No,
you didn't.
In the 90s.
Okay, you saw it in the 90s. Okay, great. So saw it in the its first revision copy. This production used to include, I am going to do a little bit of like backstory on this production. So this production used to include things like called the rap Othello, in which generally 3 men of a generally Caucasian descent would then do a rap about a rap performance about Othello, who is Shakespeare's only protagonist, only black male protagonist. We do have Aaron the Moor in Titus, who is a villain of sorts. So this, so it's 3 white guys doing a rap, as you can imagine. In all of the revisions of this play, that aspect was in several revisions up until this latest one. In 2017, when I directed the production, the last time we did it, it was still in the script, and we cut it. We cut it for obvious reasons, but just in case you, for those of you playing the home game who don't get it, it's not right. It doesn't come across the way that you would want it to be, and it definitely doesn't feel inclusive to the audience that we play to, and the actors that we enjoy and work with. So we decided to cut it, and we were thrilled this year when we realized that in 2022 they actually did another revision of the play. So this one I have in my hand is the printed copy. This is the 2011 copyright edition. This is from when I directed it in 2017. And now it is the complete works of William Shakespeare revised again. And it says again on the front of it, but it hasn't been printed yet. So the only copy that we were able to get was actually in a digital format. We were able to print it out after we paid for our rights and everything, and check it out there. The production, along with the fact that every revision truly does not only change kind of a lot of the bits with the time, it does change a lot of the jokes in accordance to some of the style of humor, right? Like I said, like the Othello rap was probably very funny at one point, but it's not funny anymore, or what have you. Maybe it was never funny I'm gonna go with it was never funny. Anyway, I don't matter. That doesn't
They
matter my opinion
they
on.
used to lean on the Beastie Boys, the other
Okay.
three white boys thing. But yeah, I recently watched that again and it doesn't play well now.
No, it doesn't hold up. Nope, it definitely doesn't hold up. Okay, so this is the copy from when I directed it because I've got notes in here. So this is my copy from 2017. And we have so we've got these three actors, the first two who start out and they say, you know, in the next 90 minutes, 97 minutes, 90 minutes, depending on the version that you have, we are going to do all of Shakespeare's plays. And you quickly figure out that these three actors are doing this for you. And you're kind of watching them in the middle of a rehearsal, or as I like to say, we're all making it up as we go along. And that indeed is what is happening in some of these situations. And so the show requires a lot of audience participation. One of the things that I tell audience members when they come is that if they absolutely do not want to have any contact with the actor, they don't want to be talked to, they don't want to be looked at, don't sit, just don't come. I don't know. Do this. So what we joke is we say, you know, we all understand, go ahead and cross both your arms over your body. If you're like, please do not pull me on stage, I will die in a hellish fire, stabbed like Caesar. I will. Just please do this. If you don't, you're like, please don't touch me. But that's part of what makes the show so fun. You know, there's a lot of call outs and responses. So when the actors ask you a question, you absolutely can and are encouraged to answer. When the actors you know, make you laugh, please feel free to laugh out loud because the actors absolutely need it. You know, last night we tried during the run to try to give them a little bit of an audience with different people in the room, but actors don't always make the best audience members because we don't always laugh at the things that we're supposed to laugh at. We want very badly to laugh, but unfortunately it just doesn't work out that way for us all the time. And so as a result, because of that,
like that too.
Yes. And so as a result, because of that, they'll be like, oh my God, that was so funny, you know? And then the actors will be like, what was funny? What do you mean that was funny? Can you be more specific? I don't know what to keep. I'm going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And so getting to see it in front of an audience last night was absolutely just tear-jerking for me. One, because I got to hear that there is a literary critic named David Ball, who wrote a book called Backwards and Forwards, which is about play analyzation. And then there's a couple of other directing books that I've always really enjoyed, and one of them is this one, stage direction by Jim Patterson. And in David and in this book, the sentiment is the same as in David Ball book, which is actors are people who as children did not get enough affirmation from their parents growing up and now seek it on a nightly basis, 8 shows a week, 6 days a week, 8 shows a week. And so we definitely have a lot of fun with that trope in this world and in this show. The show does truly aim to provide a little bit of humor for everybody involved, right? And having said that, because it is about Shakespeare, and all of you have, you know, if you're present for this, I'm sure you've been present for our other Shakesologies, and if you're a big Shakespeare fan, then you have no problem saying like, yeah, Shakespeare was written over 400 years ago, and definitely shares a lot of humor that is over 400 years old. And everyone who says Shakespeare is so erudite, Shakespeare is so uptight, it's so highfalutin, you know, and it's not. It is a bunch of 12-year-old boy humor hidden under iambic pentameter and flowery language. I mean, it's just a bunch of jokes about genitals and defecation. I mean, you know, so this play is absolutely fabulous and hilarious because it takes all of those very funny moments in Shakespeare and puts them in today's language. Having said that, as a result, this play is absolutely PG-13. We do follow the PG-13 rules, which means we get one F word. So we have the one. And in fact, one of the things that I'll go ahead and do is I'm gonna share my screen here for a second and show off the program of the show just a little bit, so you guys can get a sense of who we're talking about and what we've got going on here. So here we go. I'm gonna share my screen. I will say that this program is made to fit on a cell phone, so please forgive the screen share because it is going to be a little bit awkward. All right. So here we go. We have the program. As you can see here, we have our little Shakespeare guy that I talked about a little bit. He's coming out of a copy of that first folio that sold for about $10 million.
9.98.
Yes, 9.98. It's like about $10 million, 9.98. And then our Shakespeare guy that we revamped from a